and for the lack of internet on at least 2 floors of the hotel. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. Completely sorry. Now, I don't promise, but I tell you that we are going to try to do our best, and hopefully things will improve there. I also, on behalf of all the organizers, I would love to register an apology to those who stayed at the great outdoors. Now, I don't want to apologize for nature. The roads and the way they are, I will let a government official do that. This is what I think I should apologize for. We thought that taking a particular route, which is a little not too bumpy, would be a little comfortable. Like we know researchers, sometimes you get a couple results that you didn't intend. And unfortunately, if you don't control for them, they affect your results and skew them really badly. So as such, taking that route added 40 minutes to your ride home and has added 40 minutes to your ride here. Very sorry. We are going to fix that beginning today, 7:30 p.m. We will take the shorter route, bumpy as it is, it will get us there faster. And should anyone stop the bus for bathroom breaks? Yes. But anyone stop the bus for anything other than that, kindly come and pull my ear and let us know. We'll try to get you to the hotel as fast as we can and try to get you from the hotel as fast as we can. So very, very sorry for the ride back home yesterday. We understand that you all arrived very tired. And for the ride to this place this morning, very sorry. We'll try to improve that. Thank you. And also, I could apologize for this, for the little sleep many of you got, even after long flights to Uganda and rides to BLI. I promise and I commit that every day it will be my hope that we all leave our hotels at 7:30, but exactly 7:30 p.m. I'll be done talking and the buses should be ready to leave so that we have time back at the hotel and rest for the night. Now, if that doesn't happen, I will resign. Don't hold me to that word, because I will not until Friday. A few housekeeping things. Please note that here at BLI we will provide 2 hot meals, 2 hot full meals, and 2 break meals. We'll provide a hot meal for lunch, and I'll give you the menu as we go along, and we'll provide a hot meal for dinner. We'll all have dinner together at 6:45 every day, and hopefully be done by 7:30 to leave for the hotels. In between the conversations, we'll have 2 lighter meals and snack. A mid-morning break tea break and a mid-afternoon break tea break. Those who would love to enjoy some hard drinks, beer, soda, whiskey, gin, etc., if you move out of the tent to my extreme right around Mary's Hall, there is a selling point for drinks. Sometimes conversations move smoother with a little incentive. So it's there for those who want those. But also those who want drinks at the hotel, you are welcome to go to the cash bar. For those who want to know what that means, you go to the bar, order a drink of your preference, and pay for it. Thank you. Around the same selling spot, there are African crafts on sale. We have internet in this place, and the router name is Renu-BLI. The router name is Renu-BLI. RENU-BLI. ENU-BLI. The password is caps BLI art, the art sign, art 2025 hash. The password once again is BLI art 2025 hash. Hash. So hash is hash is the that there. You got it? Exactly, that's hash. What do we call hash in Luganda? All in Igbo, all in Chichewa. Akadala. Akadala in Luganda, in Chichewa. Dalalala. In Igbo, hash. Hash in Igbo is hash. In Italiano, I know a bit of Italian, doesn't exist. It's hash. Hash. All right. It's 9:30. And I would love to make a few comments to get the first conversation going. Every day for the next 3 days, we'll have a framing text. And in a few minutes, that framing text should be coming onto the screen. Today's framing text is from Laudato Si, numbers 48 and 49. And it goes thus. The human environment and the natural environment deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation unless we attend to causes related to human and social degradation. Degradation of the environment and of society affects the most vulnerable people on the earth. Today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And to get the conversation going, friends, I would love to suggest 3 questions for our debate and probably to be at the back of our minds. 1, is the earth truly crying? Is the earth truly crying? 2, are the poor truly crying? Are the poor truly crying? And 3, why should it matter if they are? Why should it matter if they are? I mean, if the earth is crying and the poor are crying, why should it matter if they are? At this juncture, allow me to invite the panelists for the first conversation, who will each introduce themselves, but I will have the honor of introducing the moderator. The panelists for the first conversation, kindly come and take your seat. In no particular order, sit wherever you feel comfortable, except the middle seat, which looks smaller. The middle seat is for the facilitator or the moderator for 2 reasons. 1, it's kind of a hot seat. 2, it's kind of intended to make him or her a little uncomfortable to keep it going and moving. And 3, it's easy enough to turn around without too much comfort. So, Professor Adams and the panelists for the first conversation, kindly make your way to the stage. Professor of Geography and Environmental Policy at the Keough School of Global Affairs, the University of Notre Dame in the United States. He comes with a lot of experience in these conversations and is ably going to lead this conversation. As the other presenters make their way to the podium and to the stage, the conversation today will last about 50 minutes on extractivism, land, and ecological violence. Remember, our three questions. Is the earth truly crying? Are the poor truly crying? Why should it matter to us? Dear presenters, right next to you are microphones. Turn to them and turn them on. There won't be an interception as long as they don't face each other. And when it's your turn, pick the mic or turn it towards you and kindly speak in the microphone. Professor Adams, kindly take us away.
All right. Is the microphone on? Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Thank you all so much for coming to our very first conversation of this conference. I think we are missing one of our panelists that I hope gets to join as we proceed. So, as Arthur already said, I'm Ellis Adams. I'm an associate professor at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm joined by 4 distinguished panelists here, and hopefully the 5th one will join us. It's exciting, and it's an exciting time to try to delve into Pope Francis's document. In my own view, resource extraction, perhaps is the most illustrative and the most powerful example of hearing the cry of the earth and cry of the poor. It really positions us well to start thinking about such a powerful phrase that Pope Francis put together. So I would go over what the structure would look like for today. We've had a few conversations amongst ourselves in terms of what to expect. So I would first introduce our panelists, and it would be just name and affiliation, and then I would pose an open-ended question to which they would all have about 3 or so minutes to respond to. So it's going to be very tight. I have asked all of them to be very concise in their submissions. If time allows, there would be a second open-ended question that I pose to them, after which I would open it up to the audience. Now, the goal of having the audience here is to make it truly a conversation, and in the words, okay. So to my panelists here, in Laudato Si, Pope Francis noted, and I'm quoting here, today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and cry of the poor. Like I said, in no domain or sector is this more applicable than our theme today: extractivism, land, and ecological violence. So when you reflect on your own work, in the abstracts that you shared, in the papers that you have been working on, how would you situate the most important elements of findings of your work within this larger framework of cry of the earth and cry of the poor, and or integral ecology? And I will begin with Ray. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Is the mic on? Yes? Can you hear? Thanks to Father Katangale and the BLI community for hosting us for this, I think, really important conference and this really important conversation about Laudato Si on the occasion of its 10th anniversary. So I'm going to start talking about extractivism, and I want to start with a question. And the question is, why did Pope Francis go to Canada in 2022? Why did he choose to make that trip?
I think there's several answers to that question. One is, as Pope Francis was often wont to do, he wanted to listen and learn. So for him, this was a trip to listen and learn. But there were actually some other reasons why he took that trip. One was that he was actually, in some ways, going to ask forgiveness from the indigenous communities of Canada, who had suffered some abuse in residential schools over many decades in Canada. And this had been a very controversial issue in the country. And you may recall this dramatic photo of Pope Francis surrounded by indigenous leaders from across Canada, in which he made sort of some really, I think, important statements to that community. But the second reason that he went was that Canada as a nation was going through an extraordinary process of reconciliation. The country had reached a consensus that it was really important that the really dreaded history of their relations with the indigenous population that had inhabited Canada for over 6,000 years needed to be addressed. And so the country had begun to implement a national action plan of reconciliation with 96 provisions that actually called upon everyone in the society, every institution in the society, to be a part of that, including corporations. And so there was something going on there that was extraordinarily special and maybe embodied certain lessons for the rest of the world about how to deal with complex issues like extractive industries. And in the Canadian case, many of those extractive industries are located in territories inhabited by indigenous people. And they had been, the interesting thing about that was those indigenous people, while looking at the mine, never benefited from it, never worked within the mine, and never realized any economic opportunity or benefit from those mines throughout Canada. And so this reconciliation process actually was an effort to kind of address this issue. And the government got behind it. It implemented new rights initiatives that actually protected lands. It actually gave rights over lands to indigenous populations. So in some sense, one might say the Canadian government was implementing, to some degree, the vision of Laudato Si on behalf of the most marginalized population in its country. Why is this important right now? We're living in actually a rather paradoxical moment in which we have to address the climate crisis, in which we have to address the threats to the environment, and yet we're also looking at a situation where the discussion about the just transition in terms of climate change is going to involve or require the extraction of a lot of different minerals and metals. And so in total, there's some 90 metals and minerals that are actually going to be needed for the just transition. 75% of those minerals are located on the lands of indigenous populations across the world. And so the interesting question is, what is that going to mean for those historically marginalized populations going forward? So what was particularly interesting about the Canadian case is that there's some really interesting initiatives going on because the government and the political process in Canada is actually pushing the companies to change and reframe their relationships with indigenous communities. And so what does that actually mean? It means basically they're offering business opportunities. So for example, imagine a large mine and it has many needs from the construction phase through the operational phase. There are many workers there. So there are employment opportunities. The native populations in Canada have never been employed in the industry. Now there's actually targets being set for the employment levels. They've never been offered the opportunity to create businesses that actually would, in some sense, benefit from profiting from the presence of the mine. Now they're being offered those kinds of opportunities. They're also being offered opportunities to be equity holders in the mining properties themselves, where they actually would benefit from the profit of the mine as, say, 15 or 20% owners of the mine. And so this is kind of a whole new world, and it's only happening in Canada, a little bit in Australia, so it's early days. But in some sense, it's about making new deals around mines in which, in some sense, in the Canadian case, the indigenous want to protect the environment because they have a whole history of kind of environmental ethics. So if they're actually engaging, they might actually be able to retain some of that control over the environment while at the same time in realizing some economic benefit.
Thank you, Ray. You would have a chance to respond very closely, especially in the African context. So I'll come back to you. Caesar, why don't you take it?
I'm with a group at Notre Dame called the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, and we've been working for several years around issues of mining and peace building. And so that's where I'm coming at this from. About a year and a half ago, I was able to attend a meeting in Ghana of the bishops of SECOM. And one of the issues, the meeting was specifically about mining. And one of the outcomes of the meeting was the bishop saying, we feel like we don't know enough about the issue. We need literature, we need learning, we need guidance, materials to help us figure out how to engage in this because we don't really know where to start. And it's something that we had been thinking about in the Catholic Peacebuilding Network to produce that kind of a document, like a toolkit, framework document for actors. We had a consultation process with online workshops with people from South and Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and just had a meeting a couple of months ago in Bogota, Colombia, with people from around the world working on issues of mining to gather input about what has worked, what are key questions, what are things we're not seeing and things we're missing for how to make this document really useful to people within the church about how to engage on this issue. We finally are going to be ready to publish that in a couple of months. We're wrapping up some final details. And so what I want to share is just what couple things we've learned from this process. And two quick things just to speak to the question, the quote that Ellis framed this with. One is, I think one of the greatest dangers we run with integral ecology and caring about the environment, as with any issue of ethics, is we become too abstract. You can't do integral ecology abstractly. And as Ellis said, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, mining is one of the clearest illustrations and cases of where we need to be doing integral ecology. And you can't do it abstractly. You have to dig in somewhere on the ground, like BLI is doing with reforestation and things like that. There has to be a specific tie of what you're doing. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't catch people's attention. It doesn't motivate people to act. And two, the social nature of the issue. One of the things we've seen is that there will not be progress, there will not be success on these fronts without coalitions, without broad teamwork. The mining industry is so powerful and large. Trying to get policy change and governance change is such a huge task that one of the key things that has to happen for church actors, secular actors, NGOs, everybody, is people need to pool together their resources, their knowledge, their abilities, that there will not be success in these areas of integral ecology and extractives without there being really broad coalitions of people who share these values and these concerns coming together to work against some of these larger forces that are responsible for the damages that have been getting done.
Okay, thank you. My study was on pastoralism and the recurring drought that has affected them in southern part of Ethiopia, mainly the Borana and Guji pastoralists. From 2020 up to 2024, the recurring droughts has claimed more than 5 million livestock, and hundreds of thousands of pastoralists were displaced, and tens of thousands of pastoralists have died. And my research and other literature review shows that this displacement in the days of livestock has been caused by the emergence of Ethiopian state and the logic Ethiopian state, or the emergence of the modern state and boundaries after colonial boundaries that limited their movement have created. You can't really imagine pastoralism without mobility. And the Borana tribe, or the Borana clan of the Oromo is the largest tribe in Ethiopia, and they originally lived between the boundaries of northern Kenya, southern Ethiopia, and somehow western Somalia. And the colonial boundaries has limited the movement, and even the Ethiopian government's internal ethnically based boundaries has limited their movement. So whenever any drought comes, they used to move from place to place in search for green pasture and respect not to overgraze the land. So the emergence of the modern state has limited their movement, and kept them to perish along with their livestock. And also, the Ethiopian government sees these pastoralists as irrational herders, just accumulating a lot of livestock without really contributing anything to the GDP of the country. And there was a developmental agenda in changing the ways of this pastoralism into agribusiness and extractive companies after gold mines and other mineral companies. So weaving this with Pope Francis's Laudato Si, I found three elements that speaks to the situation of these pastoralists and their sacred life. First of all, in Oromo imagination, there are two elements relating to the nature. One is, they call it Safu. Safu is like natural law. That is the right relationship with the nature, the right relationship with humans, and the right relationship with God. So since God is abstract for them, they know they are in a right relationship with God when the grass sprouts and when the birds sing and when the environment is in a kind of equilibrium. They know they have God's favor and God is present among them. But when drought strikes, they know that something is missing and the ecology has been disturbed. And for them, this safu, or kind of restrained engagement with Mother Earth, leads to peace. Not just to peace, but a kind of flourishing peace that progresses. So the emergence of the Ethiopian government has restrained that.
Okay, thank you. Basically, with Farm and Art Space Community Initiative, we are into biodiversity and making sure that farmers, big land, we absorbed most of these young people into this land to farm. However, they didn't know how to farm. And much as they were supposed to be taught how to farm, they also needed to know that not just farming anyhowly, but in a safe way. So that is when we are at a level to have healthy food and also have healthy farmers, because chemicals are actually affecting the poor more. They are the ones that don't have enough money to treat cancers that come along with it. Just last week, there is a farmer that lost his eye due to prolonged use of mancozeb. Mancozeb is a chemical that actually is widely used in fruits and vegetables to kill fungi. But because of the prolonged use, they use these chemicals without protection, without gear on their faces. So this chemical affected him and he lost his eye. And even the other eye, he might lose also the other eye. We are not talking about skin diseases that come along with these chemicals. We are not yet talking about the neurodestructive diseases that come along with these chemicals. We are not yet even talking about the chemicals that the livestock is drinking from the water because of the runoff from the chemical that we use on the chemicals that most of the farmers are using on the plants. The runoff is direct into the water, and then our livestock are feeding in this water, and then we eat the meat. So it is a long chain. But I mean, with responding to the cry of the earth, there is so much that we can do, and there is so much that we can support the farmers by providing them with alternative, safe products. Thank you.
Thank you all to our panelists for very interesting opening statements and reactions. So I will do one more round of more specific questions based on their submissions, after which I would open it and invite comments and responses, questions from the audience. But you can see a lot of sort of interconnected themes here, whether we are talking about land and agriculture or mining here, but also land and violence, as we see in the case of Ethiopia. So Ray, I have a follow-up question for you. You began by, of course, highlighting the origins of these kinds of partnerships, citing the Canadian example. So for decades, we've learned a lot about the Canada example. And given that this is a conference in Africa where we want to think about Laudato Si in the specific case of the African context, what would you say are some of the opportunities but also challenges of implementing these kinds of partnerships in the African context? And are they actually ever equitable?
Good. Well, thanks, Illis. So what can we learn from the Canadian context that I think is important, and maybe more broadly from, that are relevant for, I think, Laudato Si and into the future? Well, first of all, I mean, just the African context, maybe in terms of extractive industries more generally. I think this is a moment where Africa has to be really alive to the fact that everyone is looking at Africa for the minerals that it possesses. And there is going to be a lot of pressure on nations across the continent to actually, I suppose you might say, do deals to enable access. And governments are going to have to figure out what kind of deals that they want to negotiate and on what basis. And I think in the past, a lot of what's happened is there's been a lot of bad deals. And Africa has suffered. Africa has been exploited. And I think part of what we need to maybe learn from the Canadian case is, can we, through the kind of coalitions that Cesar was describing, kind of build a kind of an alternative vision for how extraction should appear in Africa? And how it should, if it's going to be present at all, what it should be doing to, in some sense, enhance the environment or preserve the environment. For example, just things that we might want to be thinking about. If a mine goes in, should it be, in some sense, subsidizing the emergence of alternative or renewable energy sources where it operates? And should it be operating completely on the basis of renewable energy? How is it going to be protecting water resources, which actually mining companies use an enormous amount of water resources that undermine the farming operations in the areas where they operate? And so these are sorts of things that are going to require some political negotiations. What are the economic benefits that are going to accrue to communities around the mine? Are people going to be employed by the mine? Are they going to be trained to be taking on all the different kinds of roles within a mine that might be available? And then are there these questions about what sorts of royalties, what sort of payments? Should the country in some sense be a 50% owner along with the mining company, rather than necessarily ceding all of the ownership value to the company itself? And should financing arrangements and negotiations with the company be fully transparent? There's a whole discussion globally going on about financial transparency. So these are things we're learning not only from Canada, but from other countries around the world where the battles to create better deals, fairer deals, and so forth matter. I think the big question, for the Catholic Church and for the Laudato Si movement at the moment is, do we resist mining as an industry? Do we actively resist it and say, well, it's so environmentally destructive that it shouldn't happen anywhere? Or do we engage? And if we engage, then we have to become, I think, very sophisticated about how we do engage. And we have to understand that this is a complicated global business. It's politically very sophisticated. We have to be politically sophisticated. We have to be technically sophisticated. We have to understand what the deal is that we want for our country and what's going to be in the best interest of the most marginalized populations that might be affected.
Thank you so much, Ray. So I think Ray uses the word "we" a lot, talking about actors in the mining industry. And I think Caesar's work allows us to hone in on the Catholic Church itself as a major player in this space. And given all your varied experiences, what can you say about mining within the specific context of Africa and how the church is positioned to intervene?
One of the interesting things that we observed during these consultations that was unique about the context in Africa, and I'm speaking, of course, very broadly, this isn't going to be the case 100% everywhere, but in Latin America and in Asia, it is much more common to hear people talking about saying no to mining, about wanting to have the option, the right to say no. The context in Africa seems much more to have accepted the fact of mining and figuring out how to make it proceed in ways that are sustainable and just. Whereas again, in Latin America and Asia, there's more of a sense of wanting to maintain the option to have no mining and resist mining altogether. What does that mean? I'm not entirely sure. I have some guesses, and maybe people here can help think through what some of those reasons might be. One of the things I think maybe is there being a need for the African context to do more about alternative livelihoods, which I'm sure there is a lot of work happening for that. I think BLI does work on agroforestry and alternative livelihood options, but more. I think there needs to be more of that. I think maybe like in Latin America, the idea of alternative livelihoods has pushed ahead further. And so having more options for people to make, saying when it makes sense for a community to do so, rather than not being able to see any options beyond mining as a way to have employment and income and things like that. And otherwise, I just really would echo what Ray was saying as well, with the African context and the need to really increase sophistication roads in the African continent than it has yet in South America. It's beginning to, but I think it's much further along in Africa. And I think one of the tricky parts of that is Africa is much harder, or China is much harder to negotiate with and mediate with than Europe and North America, I think. And I think where that leaves you in the African context is having to do much more with African governance as the only way to really kind of moderate what Chinese mining companies are going to be doing. And so I think the focus in other places can still be how do we engage with the mining companies. And in Africa, I think it ends up needing to be more about how do we engage our own governments, about setting better governance, setting better policies, setting better regulations, to set some guardrails on the way that mining is going to proceed, and getting our communities to think more long term rather than just accepting the upfront benefits that China gives, because I think one of their competitive advantages is they can move quickly. China comes in, says we're going to build a road, they build the road. The way they operate can move very fast, and that can be very attractive to people, but that can also be very seductive and keep people from thinking about the long-term impacts just because they're getting what they need up front and not thinking about the damages it might do long term. And just lastly, very quick, I said I'm from the Catholic Peacebuilding Network. The peacebuilding approach in mining is also very crucial, particularly in Africa, where you have a context like in the Congo where mining is very, very, very much tied up into armed conflict. Even outside of those situations where there's explicit armed conflict, the peace-building approach that's needed to resolve tensions within communities about how to proceed with mining, about how to negotiate cases of, say, militarized security at a mine site, and how to give communities tools to negotiate those situations and contexts, that the peace-building approach is also a very, very crucial element to how to effectively engage with mining. And I think you do see that very strongly with the African context in a lot of particular ways.
Thank you, Caesar. So I'm hoping that the audience is taking notes and getting your thoughts ready to join the conversation. So I'll go to Galata and Annette, and then after that we will invite the audience to join. Galata went
to find it in order to live in harmony together. So Safu is a kind of moral restraint in engaging with restraint engagement with nature, with the creator, So the Oromos call the land, in Oromo term, they call it Dachi Had Mergo. It means a womb that sprouts life. So for them, land is not just a commodity, it is like a womb that sprouts life for everything that has life in it. But in state logic, the land is a commodity that should be squeezed to be profited from. And Laudato Si, what I like about Pope Francis Laudato Si is he strongly speaks for indigenous people's rights and their worldviews in engaging with land. And land is not just a commodity for them. So we should, in incorporating Laudato Si with this worldview that sanctifies the land, including Ethiopia, the land belongs to the state. The state acts as if it is God now. It enacts any law, whatever it wants. It does whatever it wants. But for the Oromo, the land does not belong to the pastoralists either. They are stewards of the land they received from God.
Thank you. Very insightful. So, Annette, you have the last question before we open it up. And when I think about how we protect land, or how we think about the impact of modern day agriculture on land. And in your own small way as an organization, thinking about natural pesticides, to put it broadly, or fungicides. What has that process taught you about eco-technology in general? Is it even scalable? What can we actually achieve with that from small to large scale? Can you share a bit more about that experience?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, there is need, because of the need for transition, it's one of the biggest, the price of transitioning is quite high now. Given the fact that we have lost and we are losing, the cost of transitioning is high. I can give an example. In order to come up with, some of you may be making your own fungicides or pesticides from nature, using concoctions. For example, I can see even here, we have repellents for insects. That tree, just here, the cedar, the oil from it is a good repellent. However, making a small extract from just that, it requires a cost that not everyone can afford to do. So, however, the industry that is making the synthetic inputs that are available to farmers is quite cheap. It's affordable. I mean, a farmer buys just half a kilo. Okay, I'm going to put it in the concept of Ugandan shilling. A farmer is able to get a half a kilogram of mancozeb at only 4,000 shillings. 4,000 shillings is $1 and maybe 1.2 there. However, the organic fungicide that we have come up with, that is safe for the crop and safe for the soil and safe for the farmer using it, we are selling it at 15,000 a liter. That does the same work as the half a kilogram of mancozeb. Are you listening to the cost? So there is need, first of all, for the mindset change for the farmers. That is the cost first that we are incurring. Before we even before we encourage farmers to buy our input that is safe, we have to do a lot of training so that the farmer's mind is changed. That is a cost. However, it is paying off. When I came here, the first time I came to BLI, one thing that I was taught by Mr. Sylvester is the patience. He gave us a story of the priests that started BLI and the patience that they had to go through. And he encouraged us that you must also be patient and also pass on that patience to the farmers. If the farmers mark that they can be patient and use what is safe, not what is quick to use, then that is the only way we can really make sure that our goal is met. So the cost of transitioning is one of our biggest challenge. But it is possible. Farmers are changing slowly by slowly, but there must be someone to pay the cost, to be sacrificial and be patient with the farmers. Be patient to take them through and make sure that they transition and be sustainable, like they keep it in mind so that they don't do it because you've told them, but they are convinced within themselves and they do it with or without you. Thank you.
Right, a round of applause for our panelists here before we open it up. So I want to provide some guidance for how the audience invitation would work. There are several conversations today, so as much as possible, I hope that your comment, your question, your reaction is along the theme and the discussion so that we keep it very focused. So your reaction could be a question, it could be a question for which I ask that you identify which panelists you are posing the question to, but it can also be a perspective. What was striking about the conversation? What are the blind spots our discussion hasn't covered yet? So in the interest of time, Arthur, maybe we take 3 or so and then respond to and then move on to the next as time allows. Okay.
Thank you very much. I will start with the very last one, issue from my sister and good friend, Annette. Yeah, and this has been on table for a very long time around the cost. There are 2 things around this. One, who has got us into this mess? It's the people who are selling poison for profit. So, can we ask them to pay reparations, to contribute to this huge cost that we need to reclaim, to regenerate our land? That is number one. That's one side of the story. But number 2 is natural farming, organic farming, agroecology should be cheaper than the conventional, ideally, because we are using resources from within our environment, from within our surrounding. So who is making it expensive? It is the government, the regulation, the standards, the certification, the bureaucracies that governments are putting. They are putting it at a standard of the corporations that if you must get this out, you have to go through 100 approvals, or even more than 100 steps of approval. So if we get it down to the farmers, I have neem trees, for example. I have tephrosia. I have these things, if we scale it down and teach the farmer to make these things and use them themselves, I think it should be cheaper. But if the government keeps on putting those stringent regulations of certify, standardize, then it gets expensive. The last comment.
Thank you. We can only take 2.
Thank you.
Let's hear from others. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Gabriel, and my question goes to Ray. You mentioned that the African governments and the African countries get bad deals when it comes to deals with mining. How can we practically improve this?
We can take one more, yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Queensta from Ghana. My question goes to Annette. In her last submission, she made references to the issues pertaining to financial capability. And so I want to ask from her if there are some on-learning facilities that allow farmers to onboard. Thank you.
Okay, so what I would do is to try to subdivide the questions so that every panelist can get a chance, and then we roll that way. So I think, Caesar, I would come back to you for you to talk about the issue of reparations after mining has done damage. Well, as a Catholic Church responding to these issues, have you come across, and what are your thoughts about that? Sorry to put you on the spot. And Ray, the back deal issues about mining and the African state, African governments. And then Annette can respond to the questions on farmers and how we can get them on board with sort of the natural responses we're talking about. So can I begin with you?
I got nothing. It's a question about reparations around mining I've never heard come up in the conversations we've had. It makes some sense. In the context of mining, I think that's a long way off to even consider. It's much more an issue in mining. It's much more trying to find the money just from the royalties and taxes that should be getting paid in the first place. But I will say one of the tricks too with mining is the way that the industry itself plays a lot of games with ownership and responsibility. For instance, one of the challenges you see is that one mining company will come in and do all the exploration and then sell the license for the mine to a bigger company that has all the capital and equipment to mine more effectively. And then when they're done mining, they'll sell the rights to the mine to another company. And by the time you get to the end of the line, everybody's saying, well, we don't know who's responsible for doing all the cleanup. We don't know who's responsible for doing all of the site rehabilitation, because the last company that's in charge now is saying, well, we never made the deals that company in the first place made, so we're not responsible. And the company that did make the arrangements is saying, well, we're not responsible because we don't own the rights anymore, and it just falls through the cracks. So it's not reparations per se, but in terms of people making good on repair and rehabilitation the way they're supposed to. There just needs to be a lot of watchdogging about making sure that the accountability chain somehow stays intact. And what that means is communities having to make sure that they know when these transactions are happening, and as the transactions are happening, having people who can do advocacy to make sure that the rehabilitation plans are being carried through in the transition of ownership. That's the closest I got to a question on reparation. As I said, that's not something that really I've heard come up in the mining context. But in terms of getting what people should be getting, those are a couple of things that I think are at least related to that idea.
Yeah, one thing I will add, I do some work on mining myself, is that in the African context, a lot of the conversation on reparations now really focuses on, should we create an escrow process where we front charge mining companies to put some money as insurance, as opposed to waiting to engage them for cleanup after the damage has been done? So very similar to the way escrow accounts work. Of course, it's very hard to often estimate very accurately the extent of the damage, which is what environmental impact assessment should do. But of course, EIAs have their own sort of limits too. So that's really where the conversations about reparations are. The word reparations isn't often used as much, but the context is very similar in terms of what can mining companies commit in anticipation of the damage that would occur, in a way where once the projects have folded up, you are not chasing them for the cleanup, but there's some sort of a financial commitment in advance that would help do that. And Ray knows much more about mining than all of us, so I'm hoping he can add to this.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on that particular point. You know, one of the things to think about when you're thinking about mining and you're thinking about mining coming to your country, mining companies and this issue of cleanup actually may not happen for 50 to 100 years. So now, one of the things I think that could be useful in Africa is to be much more discerning about what companies you're dealing with. Because